I was shaken violently. My wife had come back after seeing off her collar. She found me asleep and shook me. I opened my eyes wide and examined her face. She was not smiling. Anger lit her eyes and her thin lips were trembling. Her anger would not be appeased easily. I closed my eyes and waited for the thunderbolt to strike. She took a few angry breaths. Her skirt gave a swish. The connecting door opened and closed, and she disappeared into her own room. I turned over, pulled a quilt over my head, and lay on my belly like a toad. I was hungry. Again, I regretted tonight's outing. I lay there under the quilt and told my wife I was sorry. You misunderstood. I thought it was very late. I had no idea it wasn't midnight. I was so tired. After being confined for so long, it was a mistake to walk so far. A mistake, all right, but just a mistake. Why did I go out? I wanted to give the money and my pillow had to summon anyone. That's all. And if there was wrong, I admit it. It was wrong. I'm sorry. I really am. Had I been able to spend the 5-1, I don't think I'd have gotten back before midnight, but the streets were very busy. There were people everywhere, and I had no idea who to give the 5-1 to, and in the search process, I ran out of energy. Most of all, I wanted to rest. I wanted to lie down. I had no choice but return home. It was unfortunate that all this happened before midnight. I felt bad about it. I had no problem saying I was sorry, but if I couldn't clear up my wife's misunderstanding, what was the point in saying I was sorry? It was so frustrating. I waited for an hour. Then I threw off the quilt, got up and staggered into my wife's room. I hardly knew what I was doing. I just about remember throwing myself down on my wife's bedding, reaching into my trousers pocket, taking out the 5-1 and thrusting it into her hand. When I woke up next day, I was in bed in my wife's room. This was the first time I had slept in my wife's room since moving into number 33. The sun was high in the window. My wife had gone out. She was no longer by my side. No, that's not correct. For all I knew, she had gone out last night when I lost consciousness. But I don't want to go into that. I felt unwell all over. I hadn't the strength to move a finger. A patch of sunlight, smaller than a Pojagi book wrapper, dazzled my eyes. Dust particles like microbes ran riot through the light. My nose was blocked. I closed my eyes again, pulled the quilt over my head, and tried to sleep. My wife's fragrance was a provocative fire in my nose. I twisted and turned. I was contorted. Sleep wouldn't come. The effort to sleep was frustrated by the scent of the cosmetics, caps off, arrayed on my wife's dressing table. It was a terrible feeling. I kicked off the quilt, got up abruptly, and went back to my own room. My breakfast, cold now, lay where my wife had put it before she went out. I was hungry. The spoon in my mouth was cold as chilled raw fish. I put the spoon down and crept under the quilt. My bedding, empty all night, had its customary warm welcome for me. I pulled the quilt over my head, stretched out, and slept. The lights were on when I awoke. My wife was not back yet. Well, maybe she'd been back and gone out again. Not much point in going into that. My head was clearer now. I thought about last night's happenings. I couldn't explain the pleasure it gave me when I fell into my wife's bed and put the 5-1 in her hand. I had discovered why callers gave her money when they were leaving and her secret psychology in giving me money. I was overjoyed, laughing inside. What a fool I was not to have known this. My shoulders lifted in a dance movement. As a result of all this, I felt the urge to go out again tonight. But I had no money. I regretted giving the 5-1 to my wife last night, and I regretted sticking the piggy bank in the loo. I was silly enough to put my hand in my trousers pocket where the 5-1 had been. Force of habit, I suppose. I rummaged around and was surprised by what I found. 2-1. I didn't need a lot. Anything was good. I was grateful for the little I found. Newly energized, I threw on my old corduroy suit, flapped my wings, and headed for the street, oblivious of the hunger in my tummy and my impoverished appearance. Once on the street, I was consumed with anxiety. I wanted Time's arrow to shoot straight past midnight. Giving money to my wife and sleeping in her room was all very fine, but the look in her eyes, if I got it wrong and arrived back before midnight, was a cause of no little worry. I stopped to peer at every clock in the street and kept on wondering aimlessly. Today, I didn't tire quickly. Finally, when the clock at Seoul Station assured me it was past midnight, I headed for home. My wife was talking to a gentleman caller at the two-pillar gate. I ignored them, walked past, and went into my room. My wife came back a little later. Once back in her room, she did something she never did at night. She swept the floor. Afterwards, I heard her lying down. I opened the connecting door, went into her room, and pressed the 2-1 firmly in her hand. She looked in my face several times, as if she thought it strange that I had come back again tonight without spending the money. She said nothing, but she let me sleep beside her. I wouldn't exchange the joy of this for anything in the world. I slept peacefully. Next morning when I woke up, there was no sign of her. I went back to my own room and laid my tired body down for some more sleep. The lights were on when my wife shook me awake. She told me to come into her room. She had never done this before. She took me by the arm, a smile ever present on her face. I couldn't help feeling a bit anxious. Did that smiling exterior conceal some untoward plot? I went along with my wife's wishes and allowed her to lead me into her room. A dinner table was nicely arrayed there. Come to think of it, I hadn't eaten for 2 days. With all my messing around, I had been unaware that I was hungry. Should a thunderbolt strike after this last supper, I thought, I'd have no regrets. For me, the world was unbearably tedious. Everything was irksome and annoying. I might even enjoy a sudden calamity. I put these thoughts out of my mind, sat opposite my wife, and ate this strange supper. My wife and I never talked much. When I finished, I got up quietly and crossed into my room. My wife didn't stop me. I leaned back against the wall, smoked a cigarette, and waited. If the thunderbolt is going to strike, let it strike now. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. There was no thunderbolt. Gradually, the tension eased. Suddenly, it was in my head to go out again tonight, and I wished I had some money. But I had no money. That was clear. Suppose I went out tonight, could I look forward to joy later? The road ahead was dark, dark. Angry, I pulled the quilt over my head. I tossed and turned. Dinner kept coming back on my throat. I felt sick. Anything that fell from heaven would be appreciated. Why not a sudden money shower, I thought. It was incredibly unfair and sad. I knew no other way to get money. I think I must have cried in bed. Why have I no money? At the moment my wife came into the room again, I started in surprise. The thunderbolt will strike now, I thought. I curled up total style, hardly daring to breathe, but the words that slid from her lips were gentle, affectionate. "I know why you're crying," she said. "It's because you have no money, isn't it?" I was startled. Her ability to see into me was not without its disturbing aspects, but the good side was that I felt she was going to give me money. If she does, I thought, that will be wonderful. Wrapped in the bedding like a dried fish, I didn't dare lift my head as I waited for her next move. "Right," she said, and she dropped something on my pillow. so light and easy. I knew from the sound it had to be paper money. "It's okay to come home a bit later tonight," she whispered in my ear. That wouldn't be a problem. My first reaction was to be happy and grateful to get the money. So I set out. Being prone to night blindness, I decided to restrict my wanderings to the brighter streets. I dropped into the tea room in the corner of Seoul Station's first and second class waiting room. What a discovery! First of all, no one I knew frequented the place, and anyone I might know left immediately. I decided to spend some time here every day. In the first place, it had the most accurate clock in the city. I didn't want to put my trust in an inferior clock, maybe end up going home early and getting a bloody nose. I sat in an empty booth, no one opposite me, and sipped well-brewed coffee. Hurrying passengers seemed to enjoy a cup of coffee. They drank quickly, stared at the wall as if they had something on their minds, and left in a hurry. Sad. But I preferred this sad atmosphere to the dull atmosphere of the tea rooms in the streets. It was more real. From time to time, I heard the train whistles, sometimes sharp, sometimes sonorous, more intimate than Mozart. I read the names of the few dishes on the menu. I read them over and over. I read them up, down, and sideways. They were fuzzy, like the names of childhood friends. I don't know how long I sat there. I was a bit confused. Customers were scarce, and the cleanup process had begun. So I concluded it must be near closing time. Had to be after 11, I thought. Can't stay here, so where will I go until midnight? I took my worries outside with me. It was raining. Pretty heavy rain. Obviously bad news for someone with neither rain gear nor umbrella. But I couldn't hang around here all night, not looking as weird as I did. So I said, "What the hell, it's only rain," and off I went. The cold was difficult to bear. My corduroys were soon wet. The wet seeped inside until I was soaked. I put up with it as long as I could. Traipsing through the streets was a struggle, and eventually I was so cold I couldn't take it any longer. Bouts of shivering and chattering teeth, I increased the pace. Surely, I thought, my wife won't have a collar on a terrible night like this. I have to go home. If unfortunately she has a collar, I'll explain the situation. When I explain the situation and she sees the rain, she'll understand. I flew home. My wife had a collar. I was so cold and wet that in my confusion I forgot to knock, and I saw something my wife wouldn't want me to see. I splashed across the floor and into my own room, leaving big footprints in my wake. I threw off my soaked clothes and wrapped myself in the quilt. I began to shiver. The chills increased in intensity. The earth seemed about to collapse under me. I lost consciousness. Next day, when I woke, my wife was sitting by my pillow, wearing a worried expression. I had caught a chill. I was still cold. My head was aching. I was drooling and miserable. My legs and arms were stretched in fatigue. My wife felt my forehead and said I'd have to take medicine. From the cold of her hand on my forehead, I knew I had quite a temperature. If I have to take something, I thought, it'll be an antipyretic. My wife handed me 4 white pills and a cup of warm water. "Take this," she said. "Have good sleep and you'll be fine." I popped the pills into my mouth. From the acrid taste, I figured they were aspirin. I pulled up the quilt and fell into the sleep of the dead. I had a runny nose and was sick for several days. I kept taking the pills all the while. My cold got better, but I still had the taste of sumac in my mouth. I began getting the urge to go out again, but my wife advised me not to go out. She told me to take my pills and rest in bed. It was on a foolish outing, she said, that I had caught the cold and caused her so much bother. This was true, so I promised not to go out. I would keep taking my pills and build myself up. I pulled the quilt over my head and slept. For some strange reason, I couldn't keep my eyes open night or day. I believed firmly that my constant sleepiness was a sign I was getting physically stronger. I spent most of a month like this. My hair and beard were so unbearably scruffy, I thought I'd have a look in the mirror. So when my wife went out, I took the opportunity to slip into her room and sit at her dressing table. I was a sight to behold. Hair and beard were a mess. I'll have to get a haircut today, I thought, as I took the caps off the cosmetics and sniffed. Among the fragrances I had forgotten for the past while was that body smell which always knotted me into a ball. I whispered her name in my heart, Yan-Shi-Mi. And I played the fire game. It had been such a long time, and the meter games too. The sunlight streaming in the window was uncommonly warm. It's May, I thought, isn't it? I had a big stretch, threw my wife's pillow on the floor, and pillowed on it. I wanted to boast to God about the lovely, peaceful times I was enjoying. I made no compromise with the world. God would neither praise nor punish me. Next moment, something really shocking caught my eye. A box of Adolin sleeping pills. I found them under my wife's dressing table. They looked just like aspirin. I opened the box. 4 gone. I remember eating 4 aspirin this morning, and I slept. I had been so unbearably sleepy yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. Even after my cold cleared up, my wife kept giving me aspirin. There was a fire one day in one of the houses, and I slept through it. I knew nothing. That's how deeply I slept. I'd been taking Adolin for a month and thought I was taking aspirin. This was very serious indeed. I was suddenly dizzy. I thought I might faint. I put the box of pills in my pocket and left the house. I started up the mountain. I didn't want to look at anyone or anything. I tried not to think of my wife and me as I walked because I knew I could easily faint on the road. I wanted to find a sunny place to sit there and slowly examine my relationship with my wife. All I could think of was the newly blossomed forsythia. I hadn't seen it so far this year, the larks in the air, and the stories of stones hatching chicks. Fortunately, I didn't pass out by the roadside. There was a bench there. I sat down and began to consider the aspirin and Adolin question. I was so confused I couldn't think straight. It took less than 5 minutes for the irritating questions that filled my head to put me in rotten humor. I took the Adolin out of my pocket and chewed the remaining 6 tablets. They tasted funny. Then I stretched out long ways on the bench. Why did I do this? I have no idea. I suppose I just wanted to do it. I fell into a deep sleep. As I slept, I could hear the water trickling between the stones. I didn't wake until early the following morning. I had slept through the night. The landscape was totally yellow. Thoughts of aspirin and Adolin flashed like lightning through the yellowing light. Aspirin, Adolin, Marx, Malthus, Matros, aspirin, Adolin. For a month, my wife had fed me Adolin, tricking me into thinking they were aspirin. The box of Adolin I found in her room was clear proof. Why did she want me to sleep all the time? While she had me asleep, what was she doing? Was she trying to kill me little by little? On further consideration, maybe it was aspirin I had been taking for the last month. Maybe she was taking the Adolin herself because something was bothering her and she couldn't sleep. That put me in a very bad light. How awful to entertain terrible doubts about my wife. So I got down quickly off the bench. My legs were unstable and I felt dizzy. With great difficulty, I began to walk home. It was nearly 8 a.m. I wanted to confess all my misconceived thoughts and ask my wife's forgiveness. I was in such a hurry, I forgot what I had to say. What happened next was simply awful. I saw something I should never, ever see. I closed the sliding door quickly and stood there for a moment, head down, eyes closed. I held on to the pillar, trying to control a fit of dizziness. Suddenly, the sliding door went open, and my wife, her dress in disarray, reached out and grabbed me by the throat. I was dizzy and tumbled down. She fell on top of me and began to shred me with her teeth. It was so painful I thought I'd die. But I hadn't the strength of mind or body to resist. I just lay on my belly, wondering what would happen next. Then the man came out, swept my wife into his arms, and carried her inside. My wife said nothing. I was shocked by her submissiveness when the man carried her in his arms. I hated it. My wife was very abusive. She accused me of being out all night, robbing people and whoring. This was too much. I was so shocked I couldn't say anything. I wanted to shout, "You're the one who tried to kill me." But if I spluttered out something so rash, perhaps even baseless, there was no knowing what awful mischief might result. Common sense said, better stomach my pain. I'll never know why I did what I did next, but I dusted myself off, got up, took out whatever change was left in my pocket, opened the sliding door gently, left the money on the door sill, and took off at a run. Several times I was almost hit by a car, but I managed to get to Seoul Station. I sat down in a place with no one facing me and wondered what I might get to take the bitter taste out of my mouth. Coffee, yes, that would be good. Here I was in the station hall, and I realized I hadn't a penny in my pocket. The rest is a bit fake. I hesitated, lifeless. I didn't know what to do. I went back and forth, like a man in a daze. I have no idea where I went. All I know is that several hours later, when I realized I was on the roof of Michigoshi department store, it was nearly midday. I hunkered down and reflected on the 26 years of my life. The hazy recesses of memory produced nothing noteworthy. I asked myself again, do you have any desire in life? I didn't want to answer yes or no. I had difficulty coming to grips with the fact of my existence. I bent down and looked at the goldfish. They were beautiful, big and small, all fresh and lovely to behold. In the beaming May sunlight, the goldfish cast a shadow on the bottom of the jar. Their fins rippled as if imitating a waving handkerchief. I was so intent on counting the fins that I didn't straighten up for a long time. My back was warm. I looked at the grimy street. Weary lives floundered there, oscillating like the fins of the goldfish. Lives that couldn't get free, tangled around an invisible sticky cord. Fatigue and hunger are dragging me down, I thought, sucking me inexorably into the grime of the street. Where to now? I wondered as I came away. My wife's face came at me like a thunderbolt. Aspirin and Adolin. It was a mutual misunderstanding. Surely my wife didn't give me Adolin instead of aspirin. I couldn't believe she would do that. She had no reason, so was I robbing and whoring that night? Believe me, no way. As a couple, we were fated to limp through life fundamentally out of step. There was no need to look for logic in what either of us did. There was no need to change anything. All we had to do was limp on through the world, wherever fact and misunderstanding took us. Isn't that right? But should my steps lead back to my wife? That was hard to determine. Should I go back? Where should I go? The midday siren wailed. A moment when everyone spread wings and fluttered like chickens, while glass, steel, marble, paper and ink seated to a crescendo, each day dramatizing the exotic. Suddenly my armpits were itchy. Ah yes, that's where my artificial wings once sprouted. They weren't there today. Erased pages of hope and desire flashed through my head, like flipping through the dictionary. I stopped. I wanted to cry out. Wings, sprout again. Let me fly, fly, fly. One more time, let me fly. One more time, let me try to fly.